I call to order this hearing of the Subcommittee on Europe, Eurasia, and Emerging Threats. Today's topic is the Balkans, threats to peace and stability. After the ranking member and I each take our 5 minutes to make opening remarks, each member present will have the opportunity to make an opening statement for themselves. We will then proceed with our first of two panels. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record. Building peaceful, democratic, and stable states in the Balkans has been an issue that's been close to me for many years. As I know, it's also been close to several of our friends here, especially when I hope that the ranking member might stop in, Mr. Engel, who has also been involved in the Balkans for such a long time. And I am pleased to be holding this hearing and thankful that we have an official from the State Department to take part in the hearing. As we are now at the start of a new Congress and the start of a new administration, this is an ideal time for us to reflect on the situation in the region and to recommit ourselves to playing a positive role in that part of the world. While the Western Balkan nations have achieved some major steps forward over these last 2 decades, including the independence of Kosovo, much remains to be done. Issues of governance, political development, corruption, judicial independence, media freedom, economic security, xenophobia, and reconciliation between democratic players in that region. Today, witnesses will get into specific details of the challenges and opportunities that exist in the region, but several points do appear very clear to me. First, while European integration provides a framework or end goal for the Balkan nations, that has proven to be an insufficient motive to inspire or compel political decision makers in the Balkans to do the right thing in far too many cases. Leadership from the United States remains absolutely essential. Obviously, Brussels can't hack it on their own. Second, we should remain committed to our shared values and hold the governments of the region accountable to the standards they profess. Perhaps we have been too tolerant of democratic backsliding and authoritarian politicians dressed up as Democrats. Third, at a time when foreign assistance and development aid accounts are set for reduction, they will be reduced. We need to rethink our points of influence and how we engage in that region. As an example, I'll remind the panel that I have put forward a plan for a mutual land swap, or would be more likely a border change between Serbia and Kosovo as part of a process of normalizing relations. If the Serb community in northern Kosovo wishes to be governed by Belgrade, they have every right, and we should acknowledge it. This is the same principle that led us to support Albanian Kosovars in their desire for self-determination. Border adjustments are not a magic bullet, but forcing populations to live in outdated borders or borders that are imposed upon them is a poor use of limited diplomatic resources. To help the subcommittee work through current issues and find creative solutions, we have an excellent panel of experts today. But first, we will be hearing testimony from the State Department, and certain activities of the State Department and USAID in the region have been subject to some controversy with allegations of impropriety being lodged, especially those from allegations that are actually presented by several United States senators. We look forward to the answers on those topics that have been brought up. Here Is called to order. We are grateful that we have a fine panel of witnesses. I would ask the witnesses, if they could, to provide 5 minutes worth of oral testimony. Anything you want to put in the record will be put into the record, but 5 minutes, and that will give our panel, our committee members here, a chance to go into a dialogue about the points that you've made in your 5-minute remarks. Joseph DioGuardi, no, I should know that after all our years. I've been mispronouncing it every time I see him for the last 30 years. A former member of Congress, a member of this committee, and while in office and later as a prominent Albanian American leader, he has worked tirelessly to focus the attention of the American government on the Balkans. He is responsible for helping bring about the first congressional hearing on Kosovo in 1987. Today he is president of the Albanian American Civic League.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were here 2 years ago. You had a wonderful hearing, and it was mainly on Kosovo and Macedonia. And you could see the photo all the way to the, it's being blocked by the fellow from Voice of, excuse me, Bashir, could you move, please? There is Mr. Ziadin Sela with you 2 years ago, being greeted after the hearing up there, surrounded by his family and friends from where he was the mayor of Struga. He was announcing that he was now going to embark on an impossible task of reforming, politically reforming the state of Macedonia. 2 years later, it was Ziadin Sela and his party that was able to meet the qualifications of the mandate. And under the Constitution, as bad as that Constitution was, and under European law, naturally, he had to be given by President Ivanov the right to form a government after the ruling party, under the strongman, Mr. Gruevski, was not able to. So you were right in your comments before. He was able to get a coalition of parliamentarians, Slav and Albanian, to be a majority and form the government. When he was supposed to form the government on September 27th, look at the result. There he is in a hospital bed. Right below, you'll see his face bloody. He's being pulled out by a thug. And just to show you how big these Slav thugs were that were hired by Mr. Gruevski, take a look at this right here, the guy with the beard. He's one of them. That was the beginning of the melee. What happened on the 27th was Gruevski's attempt to be sure that there would be no reforms, that there would be no new government, because he knows how high his crimes are and he's afraid to be prosecuted and put in jail, so he must keep control. So what you heard today is like we heard from Mr. Milosevic so many times when we were able to get hearings here. The day of the hearing, they released prisoners. They did this, they did that. So just today, because our Civic League has advertised this, has told the world that this hearing was going to be really important for Macedonia. And in this room, I dare say that 90% of the participants are ethnic Albanians from Macedonia whose families are still there suffering. They came from, one from Alaska, many from Chicago, 2 from Iowa. They're here because they wanted to show you their concern, just the way the Kosovars did many times when we had those hearings. But look at this. Now, he's being pulled out here. Look at the blood on his face. He was given up for dead. Now, the only reason he's in that hospital bed is that there was a security guard, the only Albanian hired by the Macedonian government to show you the economic discrimination in this country. That Albanian security guard realized that he was not dead. He was still breathing. They walked away from him. He took him and put him in a room, hid him until the place cleared out. Then he was delivered by an ambulance or an armored car to the hospital. His doctor, Ziadin, couldn't come here. He wanted to be here, but I was naive in thinking he could. He's had so many concussions. If you look at the picture, you're not just seeing dry blood. You're seeing pummeling, constant fists to the face and to the head. They were there to kill him. They advertised this weeks and weeks in advance that this man was an enemy of the state. It reminds me of what Milosevic called me, an enemy of the state. They called him an enemy of the people. This is a signal to UDBA or the security forces to eliminate that person. And that's what they tried to do on September the 27th. They went 2.5 hours. They put the uniformed police outside. They only came in after 2.5 hours when they thought they had beat up everybody and killed Ziadin, only to find out that he was put in the hospital, resuscitated. His doctor, Arbin Taravari, Arbin, stand up just for a minute, is right here. He flew in. He's a neurosurgeon. He had operations, but for one day, he said, I have to come here and at least take Ziadin's place and let people know that this man is going to come back and reform the government. So what do you make of today? This is not going to continue. Whatever Ivanov did, it's not going to last. It's too dangerous for Gruevski to have a new government. You have to remember, Mr. Chairman, 20,000 audio tapes were made public by the Slav opposition of Mr. Gruevski, Mr. Zaev, whose party now, I think it's LSDM, is in coalition with the party of Ziadin Sela. He is not going to allow that coalition to go forward because he knows everything's been publicized. The only answer to Gruevski to those wiretaps was, where did they come from? Some foreign thing? He won't deny them. And you can't believe what some of these wiretaps say. It also, I mean, what they say are things like those Albanians that we set up in this Matza case, and you know what? They have long jail sentences. They couldn't adequately defend themselves. They were set up. They were not even guilty, but now they're in long prison sentences. You have Komnova, when they set up this phony operation and called it the Albanians from Kosovo coming into military action. They were actually hired by Slavs to do that for an excuse to go further in their opposition or their repression of the Albanian people. Where did this all start? You said that the country of Yugoslavia disappeared, disintegrated 1991, 1992. Somehow, the government of Macedonia slipped in with no opposition as an independent state in 1992 with an old-type constitution under the former Yugoslavia. And when they formed the state, it clearly says, this is a state for Macedonian Slavs. They don't mention Albanians, they don't mention Bulgarians, and by the way, there's no majority in this state. 1/3 Bulgarian, 1/3 Albanian, and 1/3 Macedonian Slav. That's the kind of state it is. But the Albanians have practically no rights whatsoever. 5% or less of the Serbs in northern Kosovo have much greater rights, including language rights, than probably 40% of the country, let's say at least 35% of the country in Macedonia. So what's here for Albanians? We should have had a solution to this 16 years ago to stop the violent conflict between the Albanians in Macedonia and the Slavs. We guaranteed with Europe something called the Ohrid Agreement. 16 years have passed by, and things have only gotten worse because Gruevski, like a racketeer the way he is, he co-opted the junior Albanian party that put him into office, and nothing's been done. So one of the recommendations I'm going to make to you is that we have to go forward with the State Department, the U.S. taking a much more active role in a framework to implement the rights of the Ohrid Agreement. We must get that constitution changed so that it codifies the fact that you have at least 2 major ethnic groups in this state that need equal rights, because there's nothing like equal rights. You talk about the economic discrimination and the political corruption against the Albanian people, it's monstrous. And just economic discrimination. Many jobs are given out in the government. If you have 33%, and they were supposed to get up to 25 or 30% on the Albanian side, they haven't hit 10. It's around 7%. No jobs. The unemployment rate must be just like, what's going on in Bosnia right now, the highest in Europe.
Joe, you've of course.
May I put on the record, I've just summarized my comments. I'd like to put my full testimony on the record in writing. I'd like to then put the interview by the person who saved Ziadin Sela, the Albanian security guard. I had it translated from Albanian to English. I want to put in some of the photos you haven't seen, because when he was here 2 years ago, he also met with Senator McCain, and hopefully that'll be done by the doctor before he goes back. And I want to put on the record this statement that I put on the record in 1991, when Chairman Pell was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and 1998, when Senator Biden was, it's the expulsion of the Albanians by Vasil Tribilovic, 1937. This paper is the modus operandi of the Slavs and the Serbs. They want to get rid of all Albanians. I've quoted it in my testimony. I want to put the entire document on the record so you can see they're not going to give up on this. And two articles, sir. One from Mr. Foray, one of the...
Joe, we got, without objection, all of that will be put into the record.
Okay, thank you.
You did get twice as much as everybody else.
Thank you.
If you had a open borders type of free trade with these countries, it would be a tremendous benefit to them. So instead of us pushing to try to get them to do whatever the German banks tell them to do in order to get into the EU, maybe we should be telling them, why don't you start working together and opening up trade between each other and tearing down these boundaries, economic boundaries. What do you think about that?
It's not going to work, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Let me tell you why. You've got such political corruption now in Albania, in Macedonia, in Kosovo, in Serbia. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The people are not being served by these governments. I don't know what's going to happen after the elections in Kosovo and in Albania. Nobody agrees on anything, apparently. I think that it's time for the U.S. to realize that by abandoning the Balkans to the European Union, we have failed. Oakwood Agreement was guaranteed by the U.S. and by the European Union. It did nothing. It's worse now than it was before. So how could we look at normal ways of thinking to create an economy in Southeast Europe?
Got it, Joe, but now tell us your 30-second answer of your plan.
Well, the
Joe's plan.
The plan is, and I hate to see these cuts for the State Department, it doesn't make any sense. We need to be much more engaged than we are. We're fooling ourselves.
What are we pushing for?
Well, for instance, get Oakwood back on. It was signed off, but let's have an implementation framework that we are monitoring very closely. Not saying, well, let the European Union do it and we'll figure out what goes on later. So we got to take baby steps. This is not going to be solved very fast. The racism that exists from the Slavs to the Albanians is so great because of the paper I just mentioned. We got to get rid of the Albanians at all costs. Basically, that's what that paper says. And that's one of the reasons why Milosevic went to The Hague, because we brought him to The Hague and made sure that paper was put on the record so that they knew Albanians could never coexist in Serbia and in Kosovo with this kind of thinking. And now Gruevski's doing it in Macedonia. So I don't know what the answer is.
The new Serbian president talked about having a Western Balkans custom union or something of that nature. I think you mentioned that. Is that a good idea? Was that something that would help some of the economic instability in the region? Is that a step in the right direction? And what influence do you think that the new president of Serbia will have in the region?
When you mentioned Vucic and Dacic, you're talking about the people that were weaned by Slobodan Milosevic, the biggest racist you're ever going to find. What he did, he got convicted. Well, he died in his prison cell because he didn't take his heart medicine, but he's about to get convicted for war crimes and genocide against the Albanian people. What did Vucic and Dacic say recently? That they signaled that they will definitely come in to support Gruevski, the guy that did this. And what they want is an ethnic thing. They want an excuse. They want to see the Albanians out so badly that they want to see an ethnic, even though it's a political conflict and an economic problem, they want it to be inter-ethnic because that would draw Russia in, and then Russia would probably support, obviously, the Serbs, and it would be, again, a war against the Albanians. So we got to be very careful here. You can't trust Serbia. Mr. Dodic is taking his orders from Belgrade. Serbia wants, at some point, not only to have influence in Serbia, but to make it part of Serbia. The same thing that's going on in northern Kosovo. So, and listen, Serbia still has not recognized Kosovo. They want to become part of the European Union. Part of that was good neighborliness. What good neighbors are Serbs to Kosovo and Albanians? They've gotten worse, not better. So you gotta watch out for Serbia. They're the bad man in the neighborhood, and you're not going to get them to change anything because the issue is not Greater Albania, it's Greater Serbia.